Alrighty, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about those two games over in Oklahoma this past weekend. Tennessee gets a big time win, as well as Utah introduces their new teams to their new conferences with a little bit of an aggressive win for sure, but huge wins for those two teams. And now it's time to talk about the Big Ten. There were a couple of huge games this past weekend. One happened on Friday, and then one was probably the game of the Saturday, honestly. And we'll start with that one. Michigan gets a big time win over USC at home, and this one was a battle. It was truly maybe the best game of the entire weekend, all back and forth, really, really incredible fight, and this was one that really I didn't walk out feeling worse about USC. I didn't walk out feeling all that much better about Michigan. I just walked out knowing exactly what these two teams are. I think USC has made huge strides on the defensive side of the ball and have become a much, much better team in terms of tackling, in terms of just being smart on that defensive side of the ball. They just ran up against a team that is going to impose their will. That's what they're going to do, and it's going to be really tough for pretty much any team in the country, especially one that's still trying to turn around everything over there to keep up. So, not necessarily that I came away feeling terrible about USC or thinking they've reverted back to normal. I still think they've made big-time strides, but when you play Michigan, you got to make big strides, and it's got to be a Texas-level type team that is going to be able to handle that physicality, and USC is just not quite there yet. And then I think the other part of this is Miller Moss was awesome. I think there was a number of times where he didn't necessarily play his best football, but he got pressured by, I think, 24 times in this game and threw the ball all over the field in the second half. Was really incredible at bouncing back, making all the plays that he needed to. And I think, although the completion percentage wasn't incredible, although there wasn't necessarily any gaudy numbers from the kid, he made a number of plays that I think are really, really tough. And one of those things that I think just elevates USC that little bit more, that they had that quarterback that is going to be able to bounce back and make those big-time plays down the stretch, and obviously having a defense that's going to give the ball back to you helps that a ton. And then I think Michigan needed this one as bad as anyone in the country. They obviously are coming off that Texas game that was really them trying to do a little bit of Michigan football and kind of getting stifled. The Texas offensive line was dominant during that game. The Texas defensive line did plenty against that O-line. There was a lot of things that Michigan just weren't able to do in that Texas game that they were able to do in this one. They were really, really aggressive, did exactly what they wanted to do, and it's one of those things that they did exactly what they should have been doing from the beginning of the season, which is played Michigan football. That was the biggest thing in this game. 46 carries, 290 yards, 3 touchdowns on the ground. Really only broke 3 big tackles, but you'd be surprised how much it matters running those 3 plays down the middle, getting 3-4 yards, and just battering these linebackers. I think it made life really, really tough for them. And then when you needed that one big play, Khalil Mullings just ran through people for about 63 yards. So it's one of those things that Michigan needed to be doing this all year. Frankly, I'm shocked that Davis Warren came out of the gate as the starter. I really want to see what they saw in practice because this was never going to be a prolific throwing team. I understand you wanted to open that part of your offense, but you were never going to be one of the elite teams throwing the ball. Just lean into who you are. And now that's what they're doing, and it really worked out for them on Saturday because while USC played really good football for about 58 minutes, there were a couple of moments that Michigan, it's all you need, really. If you have those couple of moments that you can make big-time plays, you're going to be able to win a lot of games, and that's exactly what happened on Saturday. And then those 4 big plays were the big-time run for Khalil Mullings for 53-yard touchdown, Donovan Edwards 41-yard touchdown, another big-time play, and then Will Johnson got a big-time pick that frankly, I think is a little bit more on Zachariah Branch than it was on Miller Moss, but that's a conversation for another day. And then you had the final drive. You had Khalil Mullings on that final drive, and that's all you really needed. You didn't necessarily need a ton. This defense played really good football throughout the day, and especially this D-line, which we'll talk about here in a second. But overall, this is what Michigan needs to do the rest of the season. Hit those couple of big plays, play really aggressive, complete defense, and walk out with a win more times than not. Really impressive performance, and that D-line really set the tone. 4 sacks, 8 tackles for loss on 55 dropbacks for Miller Moss. He was pressured 24 times. Josiah Stewart was incredible. Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham played their best game of the year by a mile. It was really impressive to watch this D-line, and frankly, a little bit had to do with that USC offensive line that was not playing good football on Saturday by any means, but it's definitely one of those things that when you have to deal with Kenneth Grant and Mason Graham on the other side, it's going to be a long day. Unless you have an elite offensive line like Texas, like UGA, like these elite teams, it's going to be a long day. So where do they go from here? I think for USC, they didn't lose any juice in my mind. I understand this is a tough loss, and you definitely did not want to take it at this point, but the reality is your defense has come an incredibly long way. You have a tough quarterback that is going to make all the plays down the stretch that you need him to make. You're much better at the point of attack on the defensive side of the ball, stopping the run. I mean, did a really good job for most of this game, stopping a very potent Michigan attack on the ground. So I wouldn't necessarily say I'm out on USC or I feel any worse about USC. They are a very tough team that played really good football for the vast majority of that game, just missed a couple of moments. So it's not necessarily anything against USC. I think it's just you're very far along for where you want to be. You played much better defense. Your offensive line is a little bit better than it was a year ago. All this stuff is slowly coming together. When you play Michigan, a lot of that stuff is going to get exposed. That's just the reality of the situation. And frankly, I think USC can still move forward, have a really great season, have Wisconsin this weekend, and then a battle with Penn State after a game against Minnesota. So plenty still ahead of this team. I think it's one of those things that it's easy to come out of this game and say this team is still soft, this team still can't handle physicality, but this is Michigan. They're a totally different level of physicality, and I think USC is plenty far along for where they want to be right now. And then for Michigan, I think they found their offense. I don't think it's necessarily too pretty of an offense. I think it's very, very, it's going to be run heavy. It's going to be one of those things that if you can stop the run, you're going to have a lot of success against this team, but it doesn't change that's the only way forward. You're going to have to be physical at the point of attack. Alex Orji is going to have to be the guy that just takes care of the ball and makes the plays that he needs to, and he did a great job of that on Saturday. I think this defense is exactly what we thought they were going to be. Texas made that look way too easy in week 2, and some of that was likely because of the alignment things that have slowly been started to figure out over there at Michigan, but it goes to show you just how good Texas is in the grand scheme of things. But overall, I think it's one of those teams where Michigan's now off to the races. I think a lot of people coming out of this game, if they were to come on the wrong side of it, they definitely would be counting this team out. They would say, this team is over, go ahead and call it. They're not going to make a run in this season. But now you got a couple of games coming up. You got Illinois, which is going to be tough. Definitely have to make sure you take care of that one. Oregon and Ohio State. Say you go 2-1 in those games. Say you even go 1-2, and you're a 9-3 team that's played really tough football. There's a reality where there's some teams out there that are 10-2 that would not get the nod over that 9-3 Michigan because of some of the teams they lost to. I mean, if they have losses to Texas, Oregon, and Ohio State, kind of hard to argue that this is one of the elite teams in the country. So we'll see what happens with them. Absolutely massive win and gives them a shot at the playoff at the very least. And then you got that Illinois-Nebraska game that was absolutely insane. Went to overtime. Nebraska comes out on the wrong side, and frankly, this felt a lot like one of those Nebraska games. It felt like a lot like one of those games that Nebraska usually wins and was not able to. And then on the other side, you had Luke Altmaier just doing ridiculous things with the football. He was so efficient, so confident, and it's one of the things that we'll talk about here in a second, but he was incredible. He was one of those guys that Illinois has needed for quite some time, and they finally have a guy that's just going to execute the thing in front of him, and has done just an incredible job thus far doing that. And then you have a couple of things that it's got to feel like deja vu for Nebraska. They missed a couple of big plays, including that throw to Lindenmeyer. And frankly, I'm not taking anything away from Dylan Raiola. I thought he was incredible in this game, but you miss that one big time chance. You miss you miss that field goal to possibly go up late in the game, and you have a couple of penalties that get in your way. So there were a number of things that felt a lot like old Nebraska. I think they're a little bit far from that. Honestly, I think there's a number of things that are getting a little bit blown out of proportion because it's Nebraska, but there's definitely some things to worry about. There's no two ways about that. And then you got Dylan Raiola. I thought he was incredible. I thought he played every single snap the exact way that you would want him to. He is a freshman. He is going to struggle at certain moments. He's going to miss some of those big-time plays that you kind of need down the stretch of these games. The thing is, you have a star. You have a kid that is handling these moments way better than he probably should as a freshman, that's going through reads really impressively, that's putting balls exactly where they need to be, and he's one of those guys that maybe it's not this year. Maybe everything doesn't come together, and I know Nebraska fans badly wanted the CFP berth this year, badly wanted to compete in the Big Ten. Maybe you don't. You're coming off a 5-win season. Maybe you don't compete in the Big Ten this year. Maybe you don't get to the playoff. You still have the quarterback that's going to give you a shot down the road. You still have a quarterback that when you show up in fall next year in 2025, you're going to say we have every shot to do everything we want to do because that guy's in our jersey. So he was really impressive. I thought it was one of those games that you could have said, that last throw is obviously a huge one and maybe that ruins the entire performance for you, but he was really incredible before that. And I think one of those mistakes is not going to make the kid, and I think he did plenty in this game for them to possibly win it. They just came out on the wrong side. And then you have how Illinois was able to win, really just playing clean football against not so clean football. Illinois did not necessarily have to do anything overly incredible, but they only had 20 penalty yards compared to 89 for Nebraska. Nebraska had 50 yards on 32 carries. There was no real juice from this Nebraska team. There were a number of places where they just missed opportunities altogether. So Illinois was kind of just having to keep in the game, stay around, make sure that you give yourselves a shot, and then make the plays down the stretch, and they really did. And Nebraska fans have to hate this feeling. This feels like a little bit like the old Nebraska. I think they'll be fine down the stretch, but it was a little bit eerie on Friday night. I'll just leave it at that. And then Nebraska missed some chances. There's no two ways about that. Illinois fumbles with 8 minutes left. Nebraska comes down. Dylan Raiola misses that big play in the touchdown, and then they miss the field goal and end up losing it. So it's one of those things that Nebraska left a lot on the table. There's no two ways about that. Illinois took full advantage of those misses, but the reality is when Nebraska was able to win that game, they couldn't put it away, and they very much need to be able to do that going forward, or there's going to be a lot of the same things over in Lincoln that we've been dealing with for quite some time. And then Luke Altmaier was awesome. 21 for 27, 215 yards, 4 touchdowns, just as efficient as can be. And he has two guys on the outside, in Pat Bryant and Zachary Franklin, that are really one of the more underrated duos in the entire country. Just really, really good players, and two guys that can make all the difference in the Big Ten race, and they have plenty in front of them. Going to be really, really fun to watch this group go to work. As for where they go from now, I think Nebraska, this is a very tough loss. There's no two ways about that. But I do think there is a world where you're able to look at the positive here. You have taken steps forward. It is not near the same team that it was a year ago in terms of just not playing all that complete offense, giving the ball away a number of times. This would have been a really gross game a year ago. Illinois probably would have won by 21, 24 points, and it would have been 3 turnovers from Nebraska. It would have been a lot of mistakes, and it would have been so many different things that you have to fix and you probably can't fix in this year. The thing is, Dylan Raiola was incredible. You have the guy at quarterback. You know that you have the guy in. You know he's not going to make too many bad decisions. Now, he did have one INT on a just ridiculous play from the Illinois kid, but overall, I think it's one of those things that there's plenty of things to be upset about. There's no two ways about that. Nebraska was definitely building towards a remarkable season, and I still think they can have a remarkable season. The thing is, you probably weren't going to make it to the CFP. With a freshman starting at quarterback, there was going to be some of these moments, and that's just the reality of the situation. No reason to believe that you still can't improve and you still can't walk into 2025 with those aspirations and feel good about them. But as of right now, I think you're just a little bit away, and that's okay. You're just kind of biding time a little bit until you can really get rolling in 2025. At least that's the way that I see it. And then Illinois. This team just went on 9-win, 10-win watch. This is a really impressive team. They do go to State College next week, which is going to be tough. And then they have games at Michigan at home and then Oregon. But the reality is this team plays very clean football. They play a level of football that it's going to be really tough to just straight up put away this team. It's going to be really tough to blow them out. It's going to be really tough to keep them totally out of the game. So really impressive stuff from Brett Bielema. I think he's made a number of big-time changes around there, particularly going to get Luke Altmaier and kind of developing him in this system. But this is a good team. This is a team that's going to make all types of noise in the Big Ten. And I think they're one of those teams that maybe you look up in the middle of that Michigan game and they're winning at halftime, and then we're talking about them in the playoff. I know that sounds a little bit crazy right now, but Illinois is playing really clean football and one of those teams that is just going to be a really tough out throughout the entirety of the Big Ten schedule. So a couple of really incredible games to get the Big Ten play started over there, but Michigan and Illinois get big-time wins. USC and Nebraska take a little steps back, but I don't think necessarily the sky is falling like some people are suggesting around those two programs. But let's take our second break here, and when we come back, we got to get through these upset alerts because there were a number of games that went down to the wire or came out on the other side of really impressive upsets this past weekend, and we got to get to them all because there are a ton to get to right after this, so stick with us.